My name is Sair Al-Shemri. I am among the council of the CFA Society Saudi Arabia, and I chair this current board. I have been with the society for some time, so I guess this is my third term, and hopefully the last. Ghanem, well, you're taking over. I think I'd like to open up with a little story, probably. Around 200 years ago, Mr. James Watt, who we refer to the unit of watt of power to him, James Watt invented the steam engine. And when he invented that engine, he wanted to actually market it to people. And the unit he used to market this was the horsepower. So the steam engine could replace 1 or 2 or 3 horsepowers. And that was basically a language that farmers and engineers could understand, you know. So yeah, you replace 1 or 2 or 3 horses. But he never specified what's horse. So is it an Arabic horse? Is it a working horse? And this was actually a point of confusion for many people. Because nobody actually stick to a definition of what horsepower is. And this actually elevated in the 1960s, where cars manufacturers started to actually market their products under different horsepower specifications that were not true. And eventually, somebody needed to step in, because, you know, car salesmen aren't the most straightforward people in the world. So eventually, I have to be politically correct. This is the Chamber of Commerce. Eventually, the Society of Automotive Engineers had to step in and had to put a certain definition to what a horsepower is to actually make the industry more comparable. So when you go to this dealer or that manufacturer, you know exactly what you're getting for your money. And I think that was a game changer. And until today, we use horsepower as a measurement, as a unit of measurement in today's world. Although it doesn't make sense sometimes. You say, okay, why are we still using horsepower? Because it's a very good standard. And I think honestly the same thing can be applied to various sectors, and investment is no exception. And actually, as a matter of fact, it's much more important when your money is on the line, when the country's money is on the line, when the people's money is on the line. You actually need something more comparable and more understood to protect the wealth of others. So I think GIBS could not come at a more important time for Saudi Arabia in particular. If you recall, our Vision 2030 has 3 cornerstones. One of them is that we are the hub of the Arab and the Muslim nation. Secondly is that we are a logistical hub between the 3 continents. And thirdly, that we are an investment powerhouse. And that's how we're going to morph the country and transform it into what we aspire to be in 2030. So I think GIBS could not be much more relevant than it is today. So before I pass the floor, I'd like to thank the Chamber, Riyadh Chamber of Commerce and Industries, because we couldn't have made this without them. They have been there in the first conference. This is the second conference. We're going to go with much more, inshallah, in the future. I'd like to thank the people on the ground. Particularly, I'd like to thank Ghanem for putting so much effort into anything related to GIBS, from the translations, from the setup of these conferences. Abdul-Ilah Ad-Haim also, who has been always a very active member of our GIBS initiatives, and Ghada as well. She has been recently coming on board and leading with us. So thank you very much for coming. it's a great event, and I'm very happy to see you over here, and I'll pass the floor to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am delighted to be here because of what it says on the first slide that we are sharing, that the CFA Society Saudi Arabia is the endorsed GIPS country sponsor for Saudi Arabia. That is a major achievement. As was said, this is only the second annual GIPS conference. So from the first annual GIPS conference, where we were just introducing the idea and the concept, here we are now with an official endorsed country sponsor for Saudi Arabia. It is an amazing achievement in such a short amount of time. If I could work out how to move the slides forward, that would be very useful. Perfect. Thank you. To put it into perspective, Saudi Arabia, as you can see, the lovely blue area there, in the middle of a sea of white, where nothing else is really going on. True leadership is coming forward from the CFA Society, Saudi Arabia, within the region in terms of supporting GIPS and promoting GIPS in the region. This really ties into the idea of Vision 2030 for the region, and the society has really stepped up to the plate with respect to these investment performance standards and looking to support them and have them adopted not only in the kingdom but within the region. So that is a tremendous, tremendous achievement for the region. They were the 39th country sponsor to join the GIPS family, the 40th being China, just 2 months later. So January of this year, the society was endorsed as the country sponsor. There are many other areas which are still interested in looking at adopting GIPS, but certainly within the Middle Eastern region, Saudi is the leader for this concept and promoting ethical standards in terms of how performance is generated, calculated, measured, and importantly, presented to the prospective investor base. This is what GIPS is all about, and this is about supporting an ethical framework, a way of doing business when you are encouraging prospective investors to look at track record and to base their decisions on track record. You need the standard, very much the same as you needed the standard around the horsepower. You need the standards so that everything is consistent and comparable. And by having a local country sponsor in the kingdom, they are able to network the global investment performance standards to the kingdom's interests and what the kingdom needs to see in terms of those standards supporting the investment community. It is a global standard, so it applies across the world, but to have the local interaction between the country sponsors and the GIPS committees is extremely important. And this is really the diagram that shows how that occurs. The individual country sponsors feed into the governing body of the GIPS standards, which is the GIPS Executive Committee there on the top left. And they are fed from the GIPS Technical Committee. So when new ideas, developments with the industry need to be considered, it is through the input of the other committees that feed into the technical committee that those local ideas and the local knowledge and the clarity that is needed in each of the individual country sponsor areas is communicated to the GIPS Executive Committee. So we have the regional committees that feed into the GIPS Technical Committee, which feeds into the Executive Committee. The standards are not a static set concept. They must develop as the industry develops, and indeed they do, through the issuance of guidance statements and question and answers. So we can embrace changes in the industry very quickly. And in order to do that, we need to understand how each of the country sponsors requires different information or interprets the information and feed that back into the development of the standards so they are as relevant to the maximum number of asset managers, asset owners, and also regulators. And that way we will get the growth of the standards globally through the joining of the country sponsors to the development process. So way before we actually ended up with CFA Society Saudi Arabia being the 39th country sponsor, we set out some goals and objectives for 2017. And never has one of those goals and objectives been achieved so fast. January of 2017 was the official endorsement of Saudi Arabia as the official country sponsor. Overall, the goals and objectives for 2017 is to increase the depth and the breadth of the reach of the GIPS standards, geographically and by the asset class and the investment type. So again, the flexibility is necessary. We need to focus the outreach on firms, industry groups, consultants, and asset owners, and that's the main reason for our meeting today, to communicate the benefits to asset owners of embracing GIPS. We were looking to increase the number of country sponsors, and we were focusing on the Middle East, where prior to CFA Society Saudi Arabia, it was just a sea of white. Middle East, Latin America, and China. So within the first 3 months of 2017, 2 of those goals have been reached, for which I am extremely grateful to those country sponsors that have taken up the challenge and wish to lead with this. While we're talking about that, can I ask any members of the GIPS committee for CFA Society Saudi Arabia just to raise your hands or stand and identify yourselves to the other attendees so that you can become marked people, as it were, but also people where communication can occur. Okay, thank you very much. Again, a brave thing to be doing, to stand up and become marked people. But the committee is 8 strong? 5 strong, okay, so 3 out of 5 here, so thank you very much for that. So, there we are. CFA Society Saudi Arabia, 39th endorsed country sponsor of GIPS, your local source of knowledge, source of expertise concerning GIPS, who will help spread the knowledge to the kingdom about how GIPS will influence and potentially change the way the investment industry will grow within the kingdom, hopefully meeting some of the goals of the vision of 2030 along the way. So I'm now going to move into the concepts behind country sponsorship and what are the objectives behind country sponsorship. I've mentioned a few of those as I've gone through the fact. A little bit of history to put this into perspective. Performance standards have existed in many countries prior to the idea of trying to gather them together to become one global standard. Roughly in the 1980s, 1990s, you had the US with its own standard, the UK, Japan, Switzerland, Germany, others, Denmark, Norway. They had their own sets of standards. But again, their own sets of standards. It's not a standard if there's multiple standards, just like the different types of horses. There was a real need to bring it together to one set of standards, both for the producers of information to know what it was they should be doing and how they should be doing it, but importantly for the recipients of that information, so that they could compare information from different countries, from different managers, and know that they were comparing like with like. In February 1999, the concept behind GIPS and country versions of GIPS, so still we're not really at one global standard, but that came about, 1999. In 2001, 25 countries had adopted or established their own local performance presentation standard. But by 2005, GIPS was around and 25 countries. So now we're at 40, don't forget, 40 country sponsors. But by 2005, 25 countries had rejected their own unique type of standard and had adopted the single global standard. And here we are now, March 2017, 40 country sponsors, and we're celebrating 30 years of performance measurement standards. This is not a concept that is going to disappear. This is a concept that is well-founded, well-embedded in the industry, and is going to continue to grow with the help of local societies, local associations getting involved and supporting and adopting the standards. So celebrating 30 years now. What is the role and responsibilities of a GIPS country sponsor? A constitution is signed by the country sponsor which tells them what their roles and responsibilities are, and also what the CFA Institute, as the sponsor of the standards, is going to be doing. So with respect to the actual GIPS country sponsor, they are pledging that they will promote and maintain the integrity of the GIPS standards, and they will provide local market support in terms of identifying a representative, a subject matter expert, a local subject matter expert, who will attend the regional meetings. If you saw the group of flags there on the bottom right-hand side. So representatives join in so that we have this two-way exchange of information. They will encourage, through venues such as this, local asset managers to comply with the standards. They are a set of ethical best practices, and they will encourage local asset managers to comply with them. They will enhance public awareness. They will seek investor support to endorse compliance, which is exactly why we're here to talk about the role of asset owners. They will also be able to determine the local educational needs. Those are very, very specific, and they could feed those back to the GIPS committee so that the GIPS committee can develop materials which are relevant and help to promote the standards locally. And that's a very important part of the two-way communication. They also have a very important responsibility, which is to nominate qualified individuals for regional and the executive committees. So through their nominations of what is called the nominations committee, they can determine representatives that sit on the executive committee and the technical committee that represent the regions. And the other thing, which is very important locally, is to promote the concept or the provision of verification services. Now, just so people are well aware of this, the claim of compliance, which is made by a firm, is one, a voluntary claim. These are self-regulating standards, so it's a voluntary claim. And there is a recommendation that for firms that are claiming compliance with GIPS, that they employ an independent third party to validate that the processes and the procedures that they are following, the firm is following, are sufficient to enable the firm to claim compliance with GIPS. And that concept, that is called verification. So that helps instill confidence in the recipients of information from compliant firms or firms claiming compliance that indeed this is a truly valid claim, because you have the independent third party who has attested to that fact. And so locally, for the country sponsor to promote the provision, not only promote it, but to engage individuals and firms that are supplying the verification service with the local community is very, very important. And that is one of the key roles of the country sponsor, to start to build that network. So that is extremely important. So what's the role and responsibility of the GIPS executive and the CFA Institute in the whole GIPS environment? As I said earlier, the GIPS Executive Committee is the standing committee of the CFA Institute, and it reports to the CFA Institute Board of Governors. So it is a true committee that has operational oversight from the Board of Governors. What does the CFA Institute pledge to provide? It provides financial support and resources for the GIPS standards and the infrastructure. There are 10 members of staff, full-time members of staff, employed by the CFA Institute to look after GIPS. I am the GIPS director that is based in London for the EMEA region. we have the Americas region, we have the Asia Pacific region, and we have a number of support staff as well that support all the local committees and the volunteers. There are about 140 volunteers involved in the GIPS environment. So it's not a small undertaking, and the Institute provides the resources to support that. So we have the dedicated staff, as I said, 10. They pledge to build awareness of the GIPS standards by promoting, endorsing and attending programs and events, both ones that they set up themselves, but also ones that the country sponsors are able to set up so that GIPS can be promulgated widely. And also, back to the other point, develop educational tools that support the promotion, but also the exchange of knowledge from GIPS environment, the GIPS executive, to those who need to put them into practice, the practitioners locally. So that is the role and responsibility of the Institute in supporting the standards. A key requirement of the GIPS country sponsor is to engage their local regulator, both so that the understanding of what GIPS can bring in terms of control, the environment for investment, and also knowledge of what GIPS is. So support from the local regulators really, really helps to establish GIPS in the local environment. And it's key for the success of GIPS in that nation, in that local environment. So the country sponsors are encouraged to engage regulators in the following ways. Embrace the concept and the benefit of voluntary compliance with standards that represent global best practices. These are self-regulation, self-regulatory standards. And there is a space for self-regulation, for private regulation, as well as the public regulation in terms of the continuation of governance processes. The country sponsor helps to encourage the regulator to endorse or encourage adoption of GIPS by firms. It is the firm that adopts GIPS, it's a firm that claims compliance. The firm is setting out the way it wishes to conduct business in terms of the generation, the calculation, and the presentation of their actual track record to prospective clients. So the encouragement of firms by their regulator to look at these standards and adopt these standards is key, again, to the growth within the local region. Where possible, you would like developed regulations and GIPS standards at least not to conflict. Now, there is a provision within the GIPS standards that says if local law and regulation means that you have to do something which GIPS standards would not like, then you disclose the fact that you have to do something to meet the local laws or regulations, and you can still claim compliance with GIPS whilst following the laws and regulations. So that there is the ability for all regulation to complement or be complemented by GIPS. But obviously where these can enhance each other and promote each other, that is to the benefit of the investment community. So we encourage the local country sponsor who knows the local regulations better than anybody to have the discussions and to build the bridges with the regulators so that that synergy can exist as regulation gets developed. A slightly more demanding concept is to encourage regulators or to ask if regulators might take some enforcement action when they see firms that are falsely claiming compliance, whether that be just saying, hey, we understand what the claim of compliance means, and you're making a claim, and we don't think that's quite right. It could be that. It could be ensuring that within the group that is regulated, that maybe verification is a requirement to operate within that region rather than just a recommendation. It could just be showing support for the standards, which in itself will strengthen what the standards stand for within the nation, in this case within the kingdom. So taking actions that will actually enhance for firms that are making the claim of compliance, the fact that this is a true value-added claim. And then the final thing is to encourage the recognition of the concept of verification and the use of verification as a way of enhancing the value of the claim that is being made. So country sponsors have a very important role to play in engaging regulators and exchanging knowledge with the regulators so that synergies between global investment performance standards and the local regulations can be made. One thing I want to raise at the moment, GIBS, as I said, is fluid, and it evolves and it develops to incorporate changes that happen in the marketplace. And we do that by extending the scope, by evolving the standards, but most importantly, endorsing translations of the GIBS standards and partnering with the GIBS country sponsors. And a huge amount of work has been undertaken within Saudi Arabia and by the country sponsor here of Saudi Arabia in generating a translation of GIBS into Arabic. It is in its very last stages of confirmation at the moment, and I suspect within a matter of weeks we will actually see the release of an endorsed Arabic translation of the GIBS standards. Again, tremendous work by the country sponsor, exactly the sort of commitment which is held in deep regard by the executive committee and will be of great benefit to the kingdom. So again, congratulations to the country sponsor for all that work, and just say look out for the release of that translation of GIBS into Arabic. A key step forward for the region, definitely. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of the development of GIBS, where is GIBS, how do we know about the growth of the standards? As I said, we're now celebrating 30 years of investment performance standards, but in the last 2 years, a requirement of a firm that claims compliance is that they must notify the CFA Institute that they are claiming compliance. And from that information, we can actually generate some market data and analyze the market data. So what we've determined from the latest set of information, 2016 data, is that there are firms that are domiciled in 40 countries that claim compliance with GIBS. Okay? 82% of those firms are more than happy that their firms are listed on the CFA Institute website as being firms that claim compliance. Now, some firms don't wish to be listed because they are not actively looking to advertise their ability to manage money to third parties. They prefer to do that through private networks, private conduits, so they don't wish to be listed because they are not looking to publicly advertise the fact they're claiming compliance, but they are still submitting their notification that they're claiming compliance. That's why it's 82% of the firms. Interestingly enough, and this comes back to promoting the concept of verification, 86% of the firms that are claiming compliance with GIBS are also stating that they're verified. 85 of the top 100 global asset managers ranked by assets under management are in some concept or some part of that firm is claiming compliance with GIBS. The firm is allowed to define what is claiming compliance with GIBS. It has to be broad, it has to be meaningful, it needs to be as inclusive as possible. We could not say that 100% of all those firms is claiming compliance with GIBS, but some meaningful entity of those 85 of the top 100 firms is claiming compliance with GIBS. That means that roughly 61%, let's say 60%, of global assets under management are being managed by firms that adopt, embrace, understand, support the GIBS standards. 60% of global assets under management. That is a major, major number. Obviously, there's room to development. There is room to develop within this region, definitely. Hence, Saudi society stepping up to the plate and to offer that leadership for the region. But it's 60% is already managed by firms that are understanding, promoting, adopting GIPS compliance. It is here to stay. Any commitment of resource by a firm to these standards is not going to be wasted. They will be going into a growing number of firms. And the mission of the GIPS committee is to promote and extend the relevance of GIPS to all asset managers, promote it through all asset owners, and to engage the regulators to continue the growth of the standards. So they are here to stay, and we very much welcome the CFA Society Saudi Arabia for promoting and getting ahead of the curve and leading the industry in the region with respect to GIPS standards. So now, having said that, we're going to get to what are the benefits of GIPS to asset owners, because we really believe that with asset owners leading the charge, leading the change by wishing to promote, endorse, adopt the standards, growth will come within the kingdom and within the region in terms of adoption of these ethical best practices. Let's stand back a bit and understand, for those that aren't totally familiar with what the standards are, they're a voluntary set of standards, as I said, that govern the calculation and the presentation of investment performance based on ethical principles of fair representation and full disclosure. Clearly, you could cherry pick your best 4 holdings, you could annualize them out for 5 years, you could present them as being everything you've ever done, and it's some form of track record. But is it ethical? Is it a full representation? Is it a fair representation? Or is it kind of false or definitely misleading? These ethical best practices are to put everybody on a comparable, consistent basis, a level playing field, so that prospective investors get all the necessary information to make an informed decision prior to making an investment somewhere. And firms that claim compliance with GIPS are promoting these ethical best practices in terms of how they present and generate their actual track record of investment performance. So the mission of the GIPS standards, which is the mission of the GIPS Executive Committee, is to promote ethics and integrity and instill trust, regain back the trust that has been lost, and do that through the use of these GIPS standards by achieving universal demand. I mean, let's think big here. Universal demand for compliance by asset owners, adoption by asset managers, and support from regulators for the ultimate benefit of the global investment community. And again, this speaks so much to the Vision 2030 of changing the kingdom from being oil-based, commodity-driven, to being an investment-based environment. For the benefit of the investment community, these standards will help set a level upon which the industry can operate. It's a small part, but it is definitely a significant part, and a part that needs or can be addressed by the adoption of these standards. So the objectives are to ensure accurate and consistent data, worldwide acceptance of the standard, you've seen that from the map of the world, fair global competition among the investment firms, promote self-regulation, the industry itself taking control and wishing to achieve a higher standard, and then promote investors' interests and rebuild investor confidence. What are the benefits to asset owners? And hopefully some of this is becoming clear now. These are the asset owners who themselves are looking for professional investors to help them. But asset owners can benefit from these standards in 2 ways. They can raise the practices of the industry, they can drive the practices of the industry, change the industry. In the calculations you use, the presentation of performance information, by inquiring of asset managers whether they support the standards, and potentially, ultimately, requiring the asset managers that they wish to do business with are claiming compliance with GIPS. Now, clearly, their fiduciary responsibility isn't going to be laid aside because they will only do business with firms that claim compliance with GIPS. So fiduciary responsibility overall must govern what they do. But by promoting the fact that GIPS standards are important, it is going to raise the level of best practices, the industry best practices, in terms of how performance is presented and what track record, the fairness, the fullness of the track record that is used for investment managers to acquire additional assets. Asset owners can help push that development by showing their support and their use of firms that are maintaining those standards through their claim of compliance with GIPS. Now, the other thing that asset owners can do is they can themselves claim compliance with the GIPS standards. They are managing assets. They are managing pools of assets or have control of assets, and therefore they can themselves adopt all the concepts within GIPS and put in place a structure, a foundation that enables them to confidently take that pool of assets and produce information about the performance. Everybody has a boss, and plans have stakeholders, and the plans will be reporting to the stakeholders. Should they have some proprietary way of doing that, or should they maybe look at this global approach and adopt that instead, so that it can be easily understood what they're doing when they are reporting to their stakeholders, or when some due diligence comes into effect and needs to look at the way a plan is being run and information is needed to support what they have done. So asset owners can claim compliance with GIPS, and we have a guidance statement that addresses how an asset owner can look at GIPS and apply it to their particular environment, but also asset owners can raise the standard of the industry by promoting, adopting, and potentially requiring the firms that they do business with to be claiming compliance with GIPS. So who are these asset owners? What could they be? Public and private pension funds. A huge marketplace for that within the US, and a lot of the drive by asset owners in the US comes from the public pension plans, realizing the benefits of firms that are claiming compliance and the information they're receiving from firms that are claiming compliance, and therefore generate specific sets of information. Endowments, foundations, family offices, sovereign wealth, fiduciaries and others with responsibility for assets. So this is a big pool of people who can really influence the development of the industry going forward with respect to these standards. And what they're doing, what they're able to influence, is getting consistency in the calculation and the presentation of performance results. And it includes things such as the frequency of valuation, the treatment of cash flows, the handling of accruals, right from transaction-level concepts all the way through to the ultimate presentation that a prospective client would receive. So it's quality control of the underlying data right the way through to the ultimate presentation. The saying in the UK, the US, garbage in, garbage out. If you've got rubbish information, it doesn't matter how pretty that end performance number looks like, it's still garbage. So GIPS really understands what is necessary to control the information at the very initial input level, the valuations, the transactions, the portfolio accounting, right the way through to what is a full and fair presentation of a manager's ability to manage a particular strategy, and what information should a prospective client be receiving in order to make consistent comparison across firms and across managers. So consistency, full disclosure of the details, all the information. It's not just return, it's risk as well. Sure, is there more that can be done in terms of developing some of the risk ideas within a performance standard? Yes, absolutely, but there is still initial ideas around disclosing risks, material risks, both in terms of benchmarks and in terms of the composite return, which is the way a strategy is presented. So there's risk and there's return, there's disclosures, there's material changes. All that information is generated and given to the prospective client so they have a full understanding of what it is they're looking at and can compare across. Ultimately, it's promoting investors' interests. But with asset owners raising the industry practice, they are driving how the industry is going to look in terms of the ethical standards that the industry is taking as their baseline. So with asset owners promoting these standards and working with firms that support these standards, it is really raising the industry to a new level, an additional level, over and above the minimum that is required to what is best practice for an industry to be working on. Again, we are at the perfect time within the kingdom to be setting out what that ethical level is going to be, and these standards will hopefully help get to that level. So we can look at the benefit to asset owners who are requiring compliance from the people they're dealing with. We'll first look at that. First, when they're requiring the managers they're dealing with to be claiming compliance, the asset owners are getting an enhanced ability to compare performance from the different managers that they're looking at. They get increased transparency because there is consistency, comparability, the whole level of information of the actual performance presentation they're receiving. There's consistency in the calculation, the presentation, as I've said. A full disclosure of details, because it's not just data, it is disclosure as well that has to be made, including concepts such as fees, what the track record is actually built from, the concept of dispersion, so how tight is the strategy that is being followed, some of the risks, the material changes, relevant benchmarks which must be presented. All this is in the performance presentation that the prospective client must receive as the first or one of the first pieces of information when the manager reaches out to the prospect through the compliant presentation. One of the key benefits of the GIPS standards is the policies and procedures that must be in place to ensure the consistency of what is being produced. And those policies and procedures must be being documented and tracked over time. Now that, of course, is increased internal control for the firms that are needing to support those policies and procedures. So there's increased governance of their processes, but increased quality control. That is a real value add to the recipient of information to know there are these policies and procedures that are in place, and for a firm that is verified, those have been looked at to ensure that the claim of compliance could be supported because they have such things in place. Because the data, the presentation, the information that is being supplied has been generated through a controlled process, the GIPS standards. Now the discussions don't have to focus on the data. The asset owners know what the standards are that are being followed. Obviously the providers know what they are because they're following them. So now the time can be spent talking about people, process, procedures, the policies, not how was that data generated, what is in your track record, what happened when XYZ rep account was closed, what else did you cherry pick in order to build this track record? That's all gone. All that discussion has gone. How many fund managers or RMs have been stuck in discussions and they can't get to people, policy, process because they're too busy trying to wade through the data and why what was presented last time doesn't reconcile with what was presented this time. That's gone because it's all being generated following a set of standards, well-known standards. The benefit to asset owners who are requiring compliance from firms is that the asset owners are driving the development. I've said it before, but I think this is key, particularly here, driving the development towards ethical best practices being in place within the industry by asking, requiring their managers to be following GIPS compliance. They are raising the level, the standard of ethical best practices within the nation, within the kingdom. So what about asset owners who themselves are claiming compliance with the GIPS standards? Not surprisingly, the same level of ideas for the asset owners who are claiming compliance as for the asset managers who will be claiming compliance in terms of control, structure, process, documentation. But it also demonstrates that the asset owners themselves are committed to these voluntary standards, that they support the concept of the GIPS standards, global performance calculation and presentation, ethical best practices. It also demonstrates that they are committed to consistent, comparable information and transparency. Transparency in general is something that is being discussed across the asset management investment community worldwide, and enhancing transparency is key again. It indicates that the asset owner themselves adheres to investment valuation best practices. They are adopting these practices themselves. They are the best thing to be doing. Performance systems, methodologies, reporting practices are already defined by the standards. They do not have to think up different the way, which is the best way, what way should we be doing this, you know, how do we justify this, that, or the other. Refer to the standards. The standards will help guide you. Not only that, but because they are standards, there is a pool of knowledge, whether it be verifiers, whether it be independent consultants, whether it be other practitioners who are engaged with the standards. There is a pool of knowledge readily available that understands the standards, knows the standards, that can discuss different processes, clarity, both locally but also globally, to help the asset owners in terms of knowing how to approach certain things and how to develop certain things. Key to it is they are supporting consistent, comparable information that they are generating internally, and then where they have external managers, which is not uncommon at all, combining the external information with the internal information should be a very, very straightforward process, much more straightforward, because everyone is following the same set of standards. So benefits there for the asset owners who have external managers as well, combining it all together to present up to their stakeholders ultimately. A little aside, but maybe this makes a point. If you're not following GIPS standards, then what on earth are you doing? If not, then what? All of the tasks that are concepts within the GIPS standards are being done within an asset management firm. They're valuing things, they're generating returns, they're generating some form of track record, they're presenting something in order to gain assets or increase their assets under management or to promote a strategy that they're doing. Okay? But if they're not doing it following a standard, then they're doing it following some sort of proprietary concept. Now that might be fine, but what that is and what it represents and why they've chosen what they've chosen to do needs to be described every time to the recipients of that information. That is kind of a waste of time. Why not adopt the standard? Now some may say that the standard takes time. You've got to write policies and procedures. You've got to have documentation. But you know what? If you don't have that, you're running a huge number of additional risks. Okay, there is a risk of reconciliation problems. There is a risk of errors creeping in. There's an awful lot of information that is constantly being discussed, linking the previous thing to the current thing and what you're going to do going forward. There are lots of grey areas. We had a discussion yesterday at Faisal University about ethics and the grey areas with ethics. Grey areas take up so much time. If you have documented policies and procedures, you can eliminate the time spent in grey areas. You can also make sure there is consistency around what you're doing with respect to certain issues that crop up, and they do crop up. You document them, and you consistently know how you're dealing with it going forward. I would maintain that adopting the GIPS standards does not increase the costs of a firm. They are doing all of this stuff in some sort of way which is only known to themselves potentially, and with controlled policies and procedures, better governance, risk control, internal audit benefits, all of the benefits that the GIPS concepts can have within both an investment management firm, but also within an asset owner's firm. If you really look at the benefits of GIPS compliance and spread it throughout the firm, there are additional adds to be gained from it, which will offset any potential initial structural things that have to be done. And it's a excellent way to reduce the overall risks that the firm or the asset owner will be running by not following a standards approach. So reputational risk can be reduced. You never want to get into that conversation where you're on the back foot trying to justify the information that you've presented last time versus this time. The standardization, the consistency is key. By adopting the standards, it shows a commitment to a business model that really values self-regulation, ethical best practices, and achieving the highest standard, as I've said. You don't need to justify the proprietary approach given the GIPS exists. There is no other GIPS. We're in our 30th year. It's been supported by the CFA Institute and will continue to be supported by the CFA Institute. It is not going away. So to end, there are many resources that are available largely electronically to do with GIPS. The website, our help desk, which is available to anybody 24/7. Questions that are submitted to the help desk will be turned around, we hope, within 3 business days. Whilst they are not part of the body of knowledge of the standards, they are experts' opinions on how to approach the particular question that is being sent to the help desk. So it's a really good support supplied by the Institute for people that are contemplating GIPS compliance or indeed are compliant, but they have an issue that needs to be discussed. We have webinars, we have an annual conference where we bring together, by its very nature, a lot of people with a huge amount of experience. You obviously have verifiers, there are consultants available, all of whom have a lot of expertise. So take advantage of those resources. And with that, we will have questions when we get into our discussion panel, if there are any outstanding from this presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, for that. And I'd like to introduce Damien Regan. He's the Director of Investment Track Record Assurance at PwC.
Yes, there we go. Great. Well, one of the dangers of speaking just after Ian, of course, is the timing. So I'll try and keep it on track to get us back to the agenda time. But thank you very much for inviting me along today. This is a great privilege to be here. I've actually been working in Saudi Arabia for the last 2 weeks. So this ties in very, very nicely to the end of my sort of stay here. I'll be coming back again next week to finish off some work. But this is my sort of first time working in Saudi Arabia, and it's been a fascinating experience. And it's wonderful that yourselves are actually the sponsor, the local sponsor societies for GIPS as well. I think that's certainly moved the country enormously forward. I remember when the UK became a sponsor, and bringing together the asset managers and bringing together the institutional investors to actually recognise what that meant was a real catalyst for the country. Since then, I've worked with Luxembourg and Brazil as they go on their own journey to becoming sponsors themselves. So I understand the time and effort it takes to get there, so congratulations indeed. Now, one of the things I've been doing over the last sort of couple of weeks, as well as working very hard with my client, of course, is being a tourist. And it's been wonderful being a tourist here, jumping in and out of taxis. Kareem's been fantastically useful. And one of the places I went to was the Historical Centre, which is a fabulous museum, absolutely fabulous. And I was actually walking around at the weekend, and something reminded me of the presentation a little bit earlier about horsepower. I was looking at some very, very old maps, maybe 100, 200 years old, when you're looking at the distances between two places. It's fascinating to see that it's not in miles, it's not in kilometres, it's not even in you know, how far it actually physically is. It's camel distance. It's how many days it takes a camel to ride between 2 different areas. And that was fascinating for me. I guess it's the same question, you know, one camel goes a little faster than another camel perhaps. But nevertheless, the concept of a transport method actually creating distance, I guess in the UK, is down to what we call Shank's pony, how far you can physically walk with your legs. So I guess that's the distance there. So this idea of comparability, of distance, of time, of performance is absolutely of the moment, so that does tie in. Right, so why am I here today? Well, I'm Damien Regan. I'm based in London, where I lead our PwC London GIPS practice across the UK. I've been involved with GIPS probably about 15 years or so, a very, very long time. I not only run the UK part, but I actually also chair our global network. We have colleagues in the US who effectively cover the United States of America and Latin America. I have a colleague in Europe who focuses on the European part, and another colleague in Singapore who sort of covers Asia. So the four of us effectively coordinate our services across the whole world to make sure we're consistent in our approach. The work that I do in London, it's GIPS, but also I work on controls reports. Now, you may not be familiar with control report, but a control report is about how a business describes its operational basis, and a report is then given over to investors. And I also look at social responsibility and carbon numbers, etc. So those three areas, track record performance, the operational controls, and social responsibility, effectively is information being handed over by asset managers to investors with this credible assurance wrapper around it. And we call that non-financial audit, as opposed to financial audit, which is actually on the set of accounts. So that's the area that I sit in, and therefore for an asset manager, an asset owner, the track record is a very, very key part of that mosaic of information, but increasingly the other areas are therefore also coming through. Now, in terms of GIPS, I've been, as I mentioned, 15 years sort of working in the industry itself, so I'm not a staff member like Ian is. I'm on the outside, but I come into GIPS via the committees. So one of those is the verification subcommittee, which I actually chair. I've been chairing that for the last couple of years, which is a committee of verifiers who come together to look at important questions about the verification, what it means, what are we as verifiers supposed to do, and certain topics, let's say, on independence, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Now, because I chair that subcommittee, I also sit on the technical committee, and you might remember from Ian's earlier slide, the technical committee is a key committee that brings together all the chairs of all the various committees, and this committee, I think, does all the hard work, really. It spends a lot of time reviewing the new guidance statements going out and looking at the big key issues. In fact, that technical meeting is meeting today and tomorrow in London, so Ian and I will be joining that by conference call this afternoon, flying overnight and appearing there in person tomorrow, so the timing overlaps slightly. But we meet quarterly. It's a very important committee to get things moving. Now, I used to be in the Promotion and Awareness Committee. This is a committee we ran for a number of years, and that committee was trying to do exactly what we're doing today, which is to get the message out about what GIPS actually is. But we didn't need that anymore because I think the support from the various members on the technical committee and others for these sort of activities is there. So that's my sort of involvement in GIPS itself. Very, very, very dedicated to GIPS and sponsoring it and driving it all forward. Now, I've been asked to talk about the verification and the verification process itself, and it's probably worth just going back to some of the points that Ian was picking up. Why does compliance matter? Because that ties through to verification. So of course GIPS itself is global, as we know. 40 countries now sponsor. It was great seeing the map earlier to see where that concentration is in the financial centres of the world. Very, very important, and it's driven forward by effectively requirements of asset managers, investors to asset managers asking for this, which comes back to Ian's point about those of you in the room who are asset owners. By all means, ask for a GIPS report from the asset managers that effectively managed the money. Very, very important. And I was quite surprised by the disclosures that about 85% of the 100 claim GIPS compliance. I'm wondering about the other 15%. That's very, well, I don't know where they are, because certainly in the UK, I don't know who they are, because everyone there is either compliant with GIPS verification, or they are much, much smaller asset managers. It may be very small. I'm not quite sure. I don't know where they are, but maybe they're in one country, let's say Japan. I don't know. But it's very interesting, but I think your strength and your weight of being an asset owner can definitely help to drive this market globally as well. Trust is very important. So trust, that really is the basis of ethics. I think having trust to work with clients. Yes, of course, you have contracts. Yes, of course, you have mandates in place. But actually, trust is key to that. And trust can be broken by many, many number of things, misrepresentation being one of those key things. So that's really why GIPS is there from the very beginning, and investment consultants, we're trying to say we can't compare different asset managers' track record, and we don't necessarily trust how they put things together. So therefore trust is important. Hence, if you think about it, the verification part comes in and just challenges that trust question. It says, you know, if someone's going to trust you, why should they trust you and your claim of compliance? Full disclosure, absolutely important. GIPS is about disclosure. Now, interestingly, GIPS is a voluntary standard. That is, you don't need to follow it. You follow it because it's the right thing to do and because your clients are asking for it. It's not necessarily because the regulator is asking for it. Now, if we didn't have GIPS, regulators probably would ask for something. Indeed, if you look in the retail market, regulators are very, very, very heavily focused on ensuring that there are disclosures all over the performance figures being sent out to retail investors. In the institutional market, do you really need that weight of regulation? Probably not. And it would be very different across the world. So that's, GIPS has managed to easily step into a space here and create trust through full disclosure. But of course the verification adds to that. It adds the credibility mark. And effectively that's kept the regulators, I think, away from the door. GIPS is also current. So GIPS isn't something that was set up 20 years ago and it stayed still. Far from it. It has moved, and Ian's worked on so many committees now and helped to develop new standards, and as I have. I'm looking at independence, an update of the independence policy. Very important to bring effectively independence of the verifier right up to date so we understand the different pressures on the independence question. We're going to touch that in a moment. But of course, it's current for asset owners, it's current for hedging, it's current for derivative use, it's current for pooled vehicles. GIPS is ever expanding and moving forward. And ultimately, I think it's all about confidence. If you can hand money over to somebody else, you need confidence that you're giving it. It ties back to trust. And again, having someone independent coming into review and actually talk about verification is therefore an important process. So if we link verification back to compliance and why that matters, you can see why we now follow through to the sort of things you do with the verification. So if we think, how does a firm themselves claim compliance? Well, an investment firm must effectively demonstrate adherence to the various rules. Now, Ian's touched these earlier, but if I just go back and see it from a verifier's eye. So first of all, firm definition, and this is, for me, one of the most fundamental points about GIPS. When someone is marketing a firm, what are they actually presenting into the marketplace? If it's an asset manager, is it the full business of the asset manager, or is it part of that asset manager? Is it all the different marketed asset managers within it? For a global asset management firm, they might have multiple marketing brands. Real estate, private equity, they might be run by very separate teams within the overall firm. So do you include them or do you exclude them? Getting that right on day one is very, very, very important. If you don't get it right, you're either including too much or too little. And that's on the asset manager. Interestingly, the asset owner is slightly different, because the asset owner, of course, isn't necessarily in the market looking for mandates. It's potentially rather like a very, very large family firm. It's got everything in there: direct, indirect, real estate, PE. It's got money managed by other people. It's got currency. It's got overlays. It's got a treasury function. Very, very, very different beast to actually define. But again, the work I'm doing more recently suggests that there are different types of asset manager even within an asset owner. There may be one that's running that balance sheet. There may be a team that's actually looking through the investment, running other agency money potentially on behalf of other aspects of the government. So very complex, and I suspect that every asset owner is slightly different in that respect. But that's why the asset owner guidance is being updated at the moment, and one of your colleagues, Abdullah, is actually involved in doing that, and I know him well. And I think that's great because we're getting some insight into actually how asset owners work. Ian mentioned input data a little bit earlier, absolutely key, garbage in, garbage out. Now, one of the benefits of having a verifier around is that they can start challenging input data and really understanding what that is. Now, I tend not to audit input data. Now, by that I mean I don't go in and look necessarily for existence of the data. I don't necessarily go in like an auditor, a financial auditor. I leave that to the financial audit teams. That's the whole level of work, separately fund audits and corporate audits. What I'm really trying to understand is, well, where does the data come from? Where did the benchmarks come from? Where is the non-audited data? How does that all work? How does it come into the systems? How do the systems talk to each other? What are the balances and checks and controls all the way through it that stops manipulation of the data even before it gets to the performance team? Very often performance teams don't understand where the data necessarily comes from. It just arrives on a screen or through a spreadsheet. So trying to go back and find out is actually quite key and therefore important. So having an auditor-style verification at least understands where the paths come from. Calculation methodology, absolutely key, of course. This is, again, one of the key reasons for having GIPs, to get comparability in the calculation methodologies. The growth of systems, very, very important for this to actually allow comparability within the business itself. Reliance on spreadsheets is always a problem, notwithstanding the calculation being wrong, but simply errors within spreadsheets. So understanding how the methodology works and the systems around it is absolutely key. And you'll find that the more mature asset managers that have GIPs and have verification, have systems that support it. Systems have often been designed to assist with verifications. Sometimes a button could be pushed, the audit button, which then prints out a whole list of joiners, a whole list of levers, all those sort of things. So there's a nice sort of overlap there as well. Composite construction. Many of you will be familiar with the idea of composites representing strategies. Again, asset managers have lots and lots of composites, sometimes very granular, right down to 1 or 2 accounts being kind of similar, and others very broad. You know, think of 100 accounts in it. I think in the US they tend to be quite broad composites. In the UK they're kind of very narrow composites. So I have some firms that have 20 and some that have hundreds. So it's very varied. But nevertheless, getting that right is key. One of my oldest clients, actually, for a number of years, they were claiming compliance and we were verifying them. But their marketing team wanted more and more and more detailed, granular information. And their composite construction just kept going and going, and they've had hundreds and hundreds of these things now, all supported by a system, so it's not necessarily a problem creating it. But getting it right on day one is absolutely key, because that sets the tone of the business. And importantly, you link it into marketing if you're an asset manager, because it's the marketeers who go to the market with that particular composite. Now, of course, asset owners is a different situation. You're not marketing the data. You tend to be reporting it to, let's say, an investment committee. So how is that data being presented? And that's quite key. Is it really appropriate to have one big composite for the whole of the sovereign wealth fund? Really, you just get one number, one percentage number, and it's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of probably individual, what I call mandates. They could be externalized mandates as well running. So really interesting question. You could do it at the high level, but certainly the work I'm doing at the moment suggests you've got to come down a level, whether you look at equities, fixed income as different strategies, or whether you break it down even further into geographic locations. But the idea of compositing is important, because ultimately whoever gets the report needs to have a report that makes sense, and it gives them some use, and it has an appropriate benchmark, and it's not just necessarily a process, it's something that delivers value, and that's very, very important. Disclosures, explaining how things work, that's again something the verifiers look at really truly, because getting the disclosures is important, explaining how the benchmark has been created, the timing when the composite has been set up, all the things that Ian was picking up earlier. And that's very much something which I look at a lot across the composites themselves. Again, systems assist because they'd be automatic printed off disclosures from a central core, but if they're actually constructed by, let's say, marketing teams on Word documents, well, there's a control issue there which we have to sort of address. But nevertheless, the disclosure is very, very key to get through. And then the presentation and reporting. Now, this is an interesting one, because what used to happen was you'd have a composite report issued by the performance team, and effectively they would put it onto a system or hand it over to somebody else, and it was gone. They didn't necessarily know what happened to it. And that report for an asset manager would go into marketing teams. It goes to an asset manager who takes it to the end client. It might be sent to an investment consultant. It might be put into a database, which then goes out. It just goes out of the firm and goes everywhere. So I'm personally very keen to understand where all that goes, because how it's used, how the firm is presenting itself, I think is really, really, really important. Asset owners, where it's being presented internally, I'm very keen to know where that lands, because again, it's got to be of use and value to the end reader. It's pointless having hundreds of composites if no one reads them. So again, seeing where things go, the verification assists with that sort of process through. Now, we've talked about the benefits of compliance, or rather Ian has very well, so I think we've got the idea of why it's useful to have it, but why jump for the extra expense and effort of actually verification? Well, this comes down to credibility. Credibility, that's very, very key. If you're going to get trust, if you're going to get transparency, having someone who is independent, a third party coming in and actually testing it, is therefore quite important. And a lot of clients would even ask, who is the verifier? Now, the verifiers themselves don't need to sit an exam. We don't necessarily get signed off by the CFA Institute. Effectively, if you are knowledgeable about GIPS and you have experience, you can become a verifier. I could leave tomorrow and set up my own firm and be a verifier. But I think it's what's behind me that gives the credibility, the PwC, the brand. It's the level of risk management, it's the experience, it's the clients that I've had before. That brings it in. So all of that is therefore important into the sharing of our credibility, in my case, with the client itself. But nevertheless, if one looks at financial audit of corporate or fund returns, you'd expect to have them audited. When you start looking at operational processes, social responsibility information, stewardship, or investment track record, we're moving in a world now where people look at it and say, okay, why should I believe it? Why should I believe it? And that's why the verification is increasingly useful. I think also it allows an opportunity to increase the firm's knowledge by the performance team. So I mentioned earlier, performance team could sit in a room, in a hub, data could come in, they do something, data goes out again. That traditionally was a performance sort of role, but now understanding where the data is coming through and being involved in the setting up of new accounts or new strategies is something they're involved in, and equally where's that information going out to, how is it being reported, that's also important. So I think this actually enables the performance team to go back to the data and to follow it through into the marketing, so it expands the role, the value, the interest of actually being in performance across the business itself. Now interesting, my experience quite recently is that performance teams here in the Middle East might sit within the investments group, almost they've expanded within the investments team. Certainly in London and other sort of other financial system environments, they might sit actually in risk and compliance, so they're actually reviewing what's happening in asset management. Now that's an interesting distinction. Are you within the line of command of investments or in the line of command for risk and compliance? And GIPS actually allows you to sit in the risk area, review what's happening in the investment area, and actually provide internally a check, a balance on exactly what's happening with the investment managers. So I think that's an important characteristic and reflects effectively this idea that you should separate roles and responsibilities. And that ties into improved internal processes and procedures. So we've talked about data coming in, we've talked about information going out, by challenging the business where this information comes from, which traditionally is not audited during a financial audit, is very important because it just raises the whole credibility internally of the data as well. Talking very briefly about what a verification is. So it's a review of the investment manager's performance by an independent third-party verifier. Now, independent is important. I'll come to that in a moment. But the idea is a verifier comes in and effectively does a form of non-financial audit following the GIPS standards themselves. It's trying to see whether or not the firm has complied with all the composite construction requirements of the GIPS standards across the whole firm, the firm being defined as what is being marketed or reported internally. And it tests those policies and procedures that Ian mentioned, which effectively are the description of actually how each of the different calculations and methods are actually being used. And that policy and procedure document is actually available for clients anyway to see, if they so wish, to add to that comparability. So that's really what you're testing through a verification. Just to give you an idea very briefly what a verification looks and feels like, there is a pre-verification stage where those big questions of what's the firm, how are you going to construct the composites, are you going to use a system or use spreadsheets, they all need to be sort of like dealt with right up front. And I'm very, very keen to be involved in that stage rather than be left right to the very end, because if you get it right on day one, it sets up the whole project. If you come at the very end, and I've been in the very end sometimes, and you've got to say, well, actually, no, you've went down the wrong route for the firm, you've gone down the wrong route with selecting that particular system didn't quite work. So getting in early is very important. You've got an interesting stage, though, of compliance. Now, very importantly, the verifier does not make you compliant. You make yourselves compliant. Your head of performance would effectively own the project such that they would get the skills and the information and actually drive the business into the compliance, with the support of the verifier, to whom one can challenge and as a sounding board and support as well. Then there's an initial visit where we would typically come in and we say, okay, let's just talk through the firm definition, let's talk about the composite construction, let's have a look at some of that evidence and see where it's coming from. And that sets us up for coming in a few weeks later at the field testing, where we do what you could call a traditional audit. We're looking at evidence, we're challenging, we're reaching out and seeing a number of different people in the business to understand how things come through. And when you've done sufficient work, you can then issue the opinion, and the opinion effectively is able to be given to your investors if you're an asset management, or reported upwards through the organisation up to the committee, investment committee, if you're an asset owner. So there's the credibility of the opinion itself. And that's typically done then on an annual basis thereafter to keep it up to date. Now, I've touched on independence a number of times, and the reason I'm doing that is because, as I mentioned, on the verification committee I sit, we're looking at independence in a lot of detail to update the actual statement. And the reason for that is because independence can be blurred very, very easily. The verifier's is critical role in this is that they are independent. And what that really means is that I cannot review something that I've created, so I can't create the track record, I can't bring you into compliance. I need to have a little bit of distance, so I review, I can assist, I can give great information and support, but I can't do. I cannot review my own work. That's sort of key to it. But that's now expanded over time because I can't sell a system or put a system in which I'm going to review thereafter. My business, PwC, does lots of work that we're auditors, we're non-auditors, we provide system advice. We have to be very, very careful that my colleague over here is not providing a service which affects my independence here. I've noticed something else in Saudi, which is I think your fund auditors are not seen to be independent to do this work, which is really interesting because that's not the same elsewhere. By default, a firm auditor or a fund auditor is independent. That's how they can actually be the auditor. So from a strict independence reason, yes. However, there is a question whether they remain independent if I was to come in to actually do some non-financial audit work. My firm would be paid twice for 2 different pieces of work, and that's supposed to potentially affect the independence of the fund auditors. So I think something for the society here to think about is, talking to your regulator about, well, actually, a verifier is independent if they're auditor or the non-auditor. It's the level at which the fees would go up to that possibly would impact the audit. But I think that's something definitely you could pick up here and drive forward as you come into the world of more verifications.
Can you read this again, please? Pre-verification, compliance.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Pre-verification, compliance, the initial visit, field testing, and then reporting. So those are the sort of the 5 key stages. And then something else that independence goes about reviewing work and systems. It's also whether, have I invested in the asset manager? Is my team married to someone in the performance team? All those sort of things. So that's when you see the new statement coming out in the next month or so. I would encourage you all to actually put some questions in there because we've really drilled down to where that comes through. Now, conscious of time, finally hints and tips. Verification does not need to be an activity left, right, to the end of compliance. Bring in the verifier earlier. See them as your key friend through the process. We have to have some distance, absolutely for independence reasons, but we are the source of experience, knowledge, contacts, and that's very, very important for you to draw upon. Consider setting up a GIPS steering committee within your business. Performance, yes, led. Risk involved, absolutely. Your back office, your middle office, someone from marketing, or someone who's doing the reporting internally. Get a really good sponsor for this, very important. That will help facilitate and drive things forward. I think the more successful verifications tend to be where you've got a very, very, very enabled, enriched steering committee to actually drive things forward. And of course your verifiers can sit on a subgroup of that or come and present. Again, that's bringing the verifier in earlier. Seek advice. So your question is not necessarily the first time it's been asked. I've dealt with hundreds of companies in the past, lots of experience, so I've heard the same question in a different way elsewhere. Of course, asset owners is a new area for us. We're learning, but through the network, you can also find some answers, and through the committee structures we sit on, again, we can find answers. So nothing is new. It's just a slight interpretation. So link into that. Don't feel as if you're on your own. Engage with the industry. You're all here today. You're engaging, and that's fantastic. I think showing that support is great, and it creates effectively the momentum for the industry itself. And I would really suggest you promote GIPS both internally and externally. Use GIPS when you're talking to your marketing or your reporting lines or your middle and back office so they understand what you're doing, and that helps to effectively enable them to do their job better as well. And externally, if you're an asset owner, do ask the sub-advised managers absolutely for their GIPS reports and their control reports and their CSR reports. Get that flow of communication, that information is very, very important. And if you're an asset owner yourselves, absolutely, whenever your market teams are out in the market, talk about GIPS. You're required to, but push it as being actually the ethical standard that it is, and it's very, very important. So I wish you all the best with this journey. I think it's an exciting time for you, and I hope you found that useful today. Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien, for that. I'd like to introduce next Mr. Hamid Bahari. He's the General Manager and Lead Consultant of QBridge Consultants.
Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. Morning. It's absolute pleasure being here with you. It looks like a dream come true, actually, for me. I am a financial trainer myself, financial consultant for the past 18 years. Worked in the asset management industry in Cape Town, South Africa. I went through this whole GIPS story before and after. When I advise some of my clients here in the country, in Saudi Arabia, in particular Riyadh Bank, Al-Ahli Bank, Al-Jazeera Bank, anybody from Riyadh Bank, Ahli Bank, Al-Jazeera Bank? Yeah, I'm not sure if you attended one of my programs where in 2011 actually, I asked the participants to write a letter to the chairman asking them or telling them why it's important for us to be GIPS compliant. So seeing this and being part of this is absolutely amazing, really amazing. Saudi Arabia is a huge powerhouse and is expected to grow even much, much further. What's the story? I was managing money, about $90 million. I was an asset manager back in Cape Town, South Africa. We did extremely well. In the first quarter of 2009, my fund was the 4th best global fund in the world in terms of risk-return ratio, called the 13 ratio. We were not GIPS compliant at a certain point of time, and then we went through the process. So what happened? I remember vividly, as if it was yesterday, the Norway Sovereign Fund, they came to us and they had some allocation for the Sub-Saharan Africa when I was still in Cape Town, South Africa. And they wanted to invest money with us. And the third question, are you GIPS compliant? The third question, are you GIPS compliant? So it is a tick before they even carry on talking to you. It is a tick, it's very important. Just think about it, guys. Imagine that an investor is coming to you, and as Ian pointed very well, the word cherry picking. Cherry picking is the big taboo, the big, huge bad word in GIPS. So we present to them and we say, okay, that is a sample of my equity return, for example. That's a sample of my equity return, which is, of course, the best equity performing fund that I have. That's absolutely crap, absolutely crap. That is not telling the investor or potential investor whether this is a representative fund for your equity mandates, for your bond mandates, for your private equity mandates, for real estate mandates. So there is a huge need from the investor side. That's one side of it. There is another need from the company itself, which is the internal controls. Imagine that you are in a company and you are sitting on board there and you are at the top level and you are not sure whether these numbers that get presented to you, they have met the best standardized and ethical standards that can satisfy you as a manager inside a company. So it's not only helping the outsiders, it's helping the insiders. Imagine that you are sitting in a company that there is no internal control systems and procedures in place. So how will you trust any of the numbers? That's exactly what the GIPS is doing as far as the performance numbers are concerned. It's really, really extremely beneficial. And what I want to tell you guys, that this is going to spread massively before you even notice. What I can describe this using something called the prisoner's dilemma. And what's the meaning of the prisoner's dilemma? I'm not sure if you know, in the game theory, there's something called prisoner's dilemma. So myself and Ghada, we are two telecommunications companies. She is Zain and I am, for example, STC. And we are not advertising. No, we are not advertising at all. Then Ghada started advertising. So she is spending money because we are 50% market share, so she wants to increase her market share. So she started spending money in the advertising in order to attract more clients. So guess what I will do? I will definitely put money as well. So, and then we are going to end up being 50% again. Guys. So that money that was spent was for us considered as a waste. Why a waste? Because both of us, we ended up with a 50% share, right? So, but we are both locked in. We are both prisoners into this idea. No one of us can quit. I cannot quit because she's going to take the market share, and she cannot quit because I will take the market share. Are you following me? So what will happen with the GIPS? With a huge difference, of course, that this money is considered as a waste in terms of the advertisement. The money spent in GIPS is absolutely not a waste. As Ian pointed very correctly, the reputation risk that you will have is way outweighing the cost of being compliant. The cost of you structuring your own standards will be so much outweighing the application of already set standards. So GIPS, what will happen here, we are now all competitors in the market, for example, asset management company, capital companies for the major banks, etc. So imagine, for example, that the Riyadh Bank is now GIPS compliant. So guess what the investors are going to ask now? I want to see whether, when I put my money with the Ahli Bank, are we also GIPS compliant? No, I'm not. Shame on you. So what will happen is that we are going to come as, in terms of the prisoner's dilemma again, that all of us, it will spread like fire. It will spread like fire. So this is coming at the very right time, and huge thanks, of course, to the CF Institute for them to host this event and push for this GIPS forcefully to the market, which is absolutely brilliant news to the industry, actually. So my advice to you is your company before the GIPS, before being GIPS compliant and after being GIPS compliant will be different. Will be different in the eyes of the investors, will be different in the eyes of the top management of the company looking after these numbers of the company. And I can tell you now that it will happen here in Saudi Arabia as well, that it will be a tick of a box. Are you GIPS compliant and verified? The answer is yes, we can continue talking. If not, we will not continue talking. So, like, I just would like to know, how many of you are managing assets, please, in the room? If you raise your hands. Managing money, okay. How many of you are consultants? Consultants, perfect. How many of you are regulators in the regulatory authority? Okay, it makes sense that no regulatory authority is here. So I'm talking specifically to the investors, to the investment side. You in a comfortable no GIPS position, which means no advertisement between me and Rada. She is not advertising, I'm not advertising. So there is no pressure on me to put advertisement. There is no pressure for me to be GIPS compliant because it will be extra cost for me for no reason. But now it's going to be massively different in the country. It will be considered as part of the business cost and business necessity cost. Who am I and what is QBridge is doing? I'm not sure if you know a company called Luran Professional Development. That's the biggest professional development and training institute in the whole of the GCC region and in different countries around the world. I myself, as a lead consultant and lead modeler and lead trainer for the company, operating in 30 countries around the world, with huge dominance in the GCC region, we started a financial arm, a financial consultancy, a modeling arm of Luran Professional Development called QBridge. Q stands for quality, quick, among other things. The company's main objective, QBridge Consultants, is to bring the finest and the most elite consultants from all over the world for every task that we do, in each and every task that we do. So when we come, for example, to compliance and verification, we are going to do both the compliance and verification. However, we are never going to verify work that we have done. Ian absolutely correctly mentioned that you cannot verify your own work. It's shameful, of course. So having more than one provider in the market, that's absolutely healthy for both of us. He is going to comply companies, we will verify. We will comply companies, he is going to verify. So it's very healthy to have more consultants in this space, for sure. We never ever consider our clients our competitors. We never consider our clients our competitors across the board in all of what we do. So there is going to be a huge knowledge share in what we do in terms of modeling, in terms of the consultancy services that we provide. So for example, when it comes to GIPS compliance and verification, my contribution, my own personal contribution and Luran's contribution and QBridge contribution towards this initiative is that I will be speaking to Ian and Rada in the CFA Institute, CFA Society in Saudi Arabia. We are going to provide, after talking to you guys, an event about GIPS, full understanding of the GIPS standards and the understanding of how can you even create your own, because you don't have to have a consultant, by the way. You don't have to have a consultant. Ian is doing a great, massive work in Jadwa, for example, is not led by a consultant. He's doing it himself with his wonderful team, Hassan and all the other guys at Jadwa. You don't have to have a consultant for the compliance. Of course, you get all of the rich knowledge of the consultants, but that is not necessary. Even if you are going to get a consultant, even if you are going to go that route, it is absolutely necessary to have the common language between you and these GIPS verifiers and GIPS consultants. That will ease our task and his task and all of the other consultants' task that's going to be in this market. So we are absolutely happy to do this, and it's going to be revenue generation for the CFA Institute at a very nominal cost so that you encourage as many participants as possible. Our share for this is going to be donated 100% to the CFA Institute. With absolute pleasure we can do something like this, which is coming at the very right time. We need people in the market who can talk the language of GIPS. So it is, it's not physics, it's not chemistry, but there are some details that are a bit tricky, and you have to understand the implications and the complexities once you start applying this on the ground. So it's not going to be the easiest task to do. It is actually very complicated. It can take you months, if not years. Like Ian can talk to you in the panel about this and how long and how complicated it is, and especially when you go to some alternatives like real estate, private equity, it's not the easiest thing to apply GIPS for these particular asset classes. So that is the first contribution. The second contribution that we are going to do is that we are at QBridge, we are so much determined to bring Saudi nationals into this sphere. So we will be hiring juniors and seniors in the Saudi market. So there is a plan within the coming 3 years that half of our consultants are going to be Saudis. That is extremely important, and that's tying very well with the 2030 vision of, if you read the 2030 vision, the most common word that is repeated in the whole statement of the 2030 is improving productivity of the Saudi national people. So Prince Mohammed Salman, he is very much keen, he is a great asset to the country really. He is very much keen on improving you, the local Saudi people, and that is our contribution in this regard. We are going to empower particularly Saudi ladies, and that's part of the Vision 2030 as well. So someone like Ghada, for example, she is absolutely brilliant. She worked, we had excellent discussion a couple of days ago. She's a real asset for the industry in the country, and she's someone that must be supported 100% by the community. We want to create what's called an ecosystem. Imagine yourself that you are in the Silicon Valley in the US, for example. You come out of Stanford University, the second best university in the world. You see the venture capitalists waiting for your great ideas. You see the platforms available for you to bring the best out of you. So that's what we call an ecosystem. That's why we have an excellent ecosystem in there. I myself am a partner in one of the venture capital companies in the Silicon Valley, and this is what I mean by an ecosystem. The investment community in Saudi Arabia needs to create an ecosystem so that it's going to flourish. And this ecosystem, it's going to marry lots of things together. We need to marry the expertise, the knowledge base. We need to marry the regulatory authorities and these kind of what we call industry-specific or industry-set standards. So we are not regulated. There's no regulation. There's no enforcement of these principles. It is coming as voluntary from the own industry that we have. So our two promises, and you can help me responsible for that, is that number one, we will be absolutely happy sharing the knowledge, sharing the expertise, and bringing the best consultants and modelers in this space as well. And secondly, and most importantly, is empowering Saudi locals who are interested about this particular area. There is a very fantastic degree for you guys called the CIPM. I have been pushing this for you guys in Jadwa. My best friend there, also in Jadwa there. Brilliant people that I have met really over the past number of years. I met you in evaluation course there, some other people. Really wonderful. I love the country here. I have been here for so many years. I know the culture very well. I know the industry very well. And we know exactly the demands of the people. So, for example, when you say, I want to do it through technology, like, for example, it was referred to, there are some other providers in the world that can help you. You cannot buy, for example, a Stat Pro solution, then you can become compliant. It's impossible. It can help you maintain being compliant, for example. But the initial work of the compliance and the verification cannot be systemized. So it has to have the human intervention in this place. So I can tell you for sure that the compliance and the verifiers, unfortunately, I could see it very, very well myself, that they are not the best in the world in terms of the modeling side of it, So I have seen it myself without mentioning names back in South Africa. That Gibbs, one of the best actually in the world, and in her Excel spreadsheets when she was calculating returns for a period, she said equals to 1 plus the return of the first period times 1 plus the return of the second times 1 for a period of like 40, 50 inside one cell. She doesn't know something called arrays, if you remember. Something in the modeling side called arrays, which is extremely important, the modeling side along with the verification side, the consultancy side of it. So it's not going to be just knowledge base and it's nice to know. You have to put it in an Excel spreadsheet or you rely on a system. And that is what we have been renowned of big time in the market here, that we are the best modelers in the GCC market by far. Actually, I want to say globally, but we can say that we are the best in the GCC country by far in terms of the modeling request that we provide. I would like to close by a quote from someone called Fred Miller back in 1991. He said exactly, we recognize, I'm quoting him, we recognize the serious need for a set of standards that are fair, that are uniform, and that are comprehensive. So these set of standards that we have now, it didn't come out of heaven for no reason. It came for a huge reason. And that's exactly what the market is looking for now. If you are an international investor and you don't know how these numbers have been calculated in your company, how would you expect money coming from overseas? How would you expect that? Absolutely impossible. Even from inside the country, people will not trust you. So how about the rest of the world? Impossible. So if you say that your numbers have been calculated using the GIPS standards, which are universally accepted all over the world, that will for sure put a statement about how credible you are in your own numbers. So it's our promise that we are going to be behind this scheme. We are proud sponsor of this particular event with the CFA Institute. That is a must that we do, and PwC should have sponsored as well. Come on. You should have sponsored as well this kind of event. That's what we need, the international companies to come and sponsor this kind of events. Maybe in the future, for example, if you can consider something like this, and also the local investments. How come you guys are not sponsoring something like this?
Last year we had the Raya.
Why not this year? Marad, I'm talking about this year now. So you are the stakeholders of this whole thing. When the Saudi financial market ecosystem is improved, that will translate in your own benefit, personally, for the society and for the country in large. All right? I just want to throw a statement, and I will leave it to you guys for the investment and for the society, specifically the CFA society, please. There is a set of standards called the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, UNPRI. I talked to Ghad about it a couple of days ago, and I really advise you to look at it. I know that this is very irrelevant to what we do here, but this is the second very natural step for you to have the UNPRI, to be a signatory of the UNPRI. There is only one company in the whole of Saudi Arabia, SEDCO, that's UNPRI signatory. Other than that, there is none. Just search for it. It's going to improve your ESG, your environmental impact, society, and the governance in large. I know this is completely off the topic, but I feel if we want to build an ecosystem again, this can only come and push big time by the investors. What did you tell me when we were at the break out there? You said, I am the investor and I am pushing the asset managers behind me, like those asset managers that are giving you the money, you must be GIPS compliant. So she is much more powerful than a regulatory authority saying, hey, you must be GIPS compliant. This coming from the money owner, the asset owner. So if it doesn't come from you guys to become GIPS compliant, to become UNPRI signatory, who's going to push for that? I love you all. Thank you so much. All the very best for the kingdom, all the very best for you guys, and take this very seriously, improve your skills. This is going to be a huge era for the country going forward. Love you all. Thank you.